Hello, dear Jacek.
Hello there.
Well, thank you very much for visiting us in Romania. We have a short session of question and answers. You have been a pupil, a student of the Golden Rosicrucians for almost 50 years, so that is 50. Can you please introduce yourself as a student of this school?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you very much for giving us this possibility to be able to talk about some essential aspects of life and death, of existence. And yes, I am a pupil. This is what it's called, a pupil of the Golden Rosicrucians. It's an international movement going across many, many continents today. And as you mentioned, I've been in that school since I was 23 when I found the school in Switzerland. And since that time, I've been working professionally in the Netherlands, in France, Switzerland on international projects. So I've been traveling quite a lot, but my heart has always stayed with the spiritual school. It stayed with the spiritual school because at a given moment in time, it answered all my questions. It didn't solve all my problems of life, but it answered the questions of the reason of living, the purpose of life, and to also solve this burning question, I think, of any seeker about the mystery of life and death.
Before we get to this purpose of life, which would be, of course, very interesting to learn about, can you explain a bit the school, the Golden Rosicrucians? Is this another form of religion?
It's a very pertinent question that you ask, and it begs the question to define religion, of course. And I'll try to do that. If we take the essence of a religion, it means to be linked with something. And if we take the spiritual aspect and not the institutional, organizational, external aspect of so many religions around the world, we're saying, how can a person, how can you and I be linked to the divine, or how can we be linked to the essence of life? And in this sense, and that is the case, that in many countries, the Golden Rosicrucians is registered as a religion, but in other countries, it is registered as an organization, as an association, a religious association as well. And the purpose is not to create a world religion, but to provide a path, to provide and point out a way of life, a practical way of life in understanding those essential questions that we started our interview on.
Okay, but there are many organizations and many schools that in this world that have different propositions to the humanity of their, like the Christian church. The Christian church, what is it promising us? It promises life after death and hopefully in heaven. You talked about the purpose of life. What does the Golden School of Rosicrucians? What is its main proposition, and what is the main purpose of life?
Again, I think these are essential and important questions, not to distinguish one organization from the other. And I'm not here to compare, to criticize, or to comment, but to stress that the Golden Rosicrucians provides an answer to those questions and has therefore a link with what we call the universal teachings, with the universal doctrine that has been available, has been offered, if you like, to mankind over millions of years. So it's not linked to a specific historical tradition. And it's not promising pie in the sky or heaven after death. What it is saying is that by a process of purification, a process of transformation, and then transfiguration, each one of us needs to enter into self-knowledge. And having attained the true knowledge of self, which also means man and microcosm, we can come back to that if you so wish, but if we look at this question of man in his true essence, it means to go through a process of purification today and now, and to have a realization of the birth of a new soul, and by that birth of the new soul, to be able to leave the wheel of life and death during this life. So it's not a promise of a future. It is a possibility of realization today and now.
Okay. Then next, I will ask you this realization. How long would it take? How long is this road? You've been on it for a long, long time. Did you already reach the end? The end of it?
I think if someone says that he has realized the path, I would go so far as to say that he or she has not even started on the path. And secondly, that path is not one which ever ends. Why? Because we move from consciousness to consciousness, from a state of being to another state of being. And I'd like to introduce here three phases of life, which are related to the body, to the soul, and to the spirit. We hardly know our physical body. We certainly don't know when we talk about the soul, and when spirit, it becomes something either symbolical or theoretical. So how can we, through self-knowledge, attain that inner knowledge and that inner transformation? The beginning has to start with the essence. And the Golden Rosicrucians, as any Gnostic and Transfiguristic school, will say that there is in every human being a divine spark. And that divine spark is dormant until, through life's experiences, we begin to ask the essential questions of life and death, the purpose of existence, as we were just saying a few moments ago. And when those questions arise, it means that there is a resonance related to that inner being, to that spark of life that is the very center of our being, the center of what one could call the microcosm. And then there is a process of change, necessarily, because we're not listening to our ego, so to an egocentric way of life, which characterizes our culture, whether it's religious, whether it's social, political, economic. And we see the limitations of the ego. We see the limitations and the enormous suffering that egocentrism or egocentricity create in the world for ourselves individually and for humanity and for whole of society. So as we see those limitations, we need to move into something which is illimited. And what is illimited in ourselves is that spark of the spirit. And as we enter into that spark of the spirit, a process begins, which will require from each one of us this element of purification, the purification of our thoughts, of our emotions, and necessarily and essentially how we live. So how do we practice that link with the divine in us. It is through becoming aware of the immortal essence of the human being. Now, how long does all of this take? I think there is never an end to the path. The path continues through life, through death, through incarnation, until such a time that one is truly liberated, but liberated not in one's body, but in a soul. And so we move from the I being, from the egocentric natural soul, we move then into a purified soul, and from that purified soul to be able then to, through self-sacrifice to the divine in ourselves, to enter into true soul life, spiritual soul life. How long does this take? It depends on each one of us. How strong is that desire in us for truth? How strong is that desire in us for love? It doesn't need to take a lifetime. It certainly may take more than just a few days, because our egocentricity is so much anchored in our subconscious, is so much anchored in what we call the higher self, that there is an inner combat, and that combat can be seen maybe as this struggle at the fight of St. George and the dragon, where we have to go into the hell of our inner being. So that requires time, patience, love, understanding for others, and above all, to listen and to work with and in silence. Many young people, we were talking with some young people this afternoon here in Bucharest, and they were saying, you know, what is important is I need silence. I need that peace of mind. How do I get it? And that, for me, was a marvelous way of a true question that was being asked, how to enter into that inner silence. And that is by ignoring and letting the egocentric fade away, and to put one's emphasis and concentration on the true essential being, which is to be found at the beginning in our heart. So that's why we talk of the rose of the heart.
Okay, then you are saying that maybe this road, this path, can take more than one life. In this sense, are we mortals or immortals?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so we are confronted here with the question also of reincarnation. If I don't manage in this life, well, I'll manage the next life. And if it doesn't work out after 10 lives, then after 100 or 1,000 lives, this will happen. If it would be like this, we would be confronted with an automatic process of liberation. There is no automatic process of liberation. It is a path that, depending on the state of consciousness of the individual, possibly with all the accumulated experience of previous lives, not your life, not my life, but the lives of past personalities that found themselves in the microcosm. And so, yes, we have an accumulation of experience, which makes us ask these essential questions. If we didn't have it, it would be just a theoretical discussion or reference to theology or religious teachings and so on. But that is not the case. The case is to be able to actually penetrate today the essence, and not ask ourselves the question, well, will it happen during this lifetime? Luckily, for some, we have the economic, social, existential conditions which allow us not to have to fight daily for our daily bread, so to speak, but where we also have the space in which to ask ourselves these questions, because they come from the bottom of our heart, they come from our inner self. And if we listen more and more to the inner self, everything else becomes then relative to that vertical inner essence. So it doesn't mean negating one's profession, one's life, one's social contacts, becoming a hermit, or rejecting life and seeing it as so much suffering, so much, because there is, and it is a world of suffering, but in fact we create the suffering in and around ourselves. So coming back to your question, because I feel I've moved in different directions, it really depends on each one of us. But if there is that sincere longing for freedom, the sincere longing for truth, then that longing will guide us to purification and then to the transformation of our soul. It means a bodily transformation as well, of our nervous system, our hormonal system, the blood that circulates through our veins will then also change in this process of purification, until such a time that a new consciousness will arise. And then the path continues, of course.
Okay, so we have this path, meaning how would be the easiest way to explain karma?
Yes, you link the question, as I feel it, the question of karma to also, can we manage to do things in this one life, or do we need many lives? What is this baggage that we carry? Karma, we could say, is cause and effect. Everything that we have done, we do, and will do has an effect in the balance of good and evil, in the balance of liberating acts or acts which will pull us down more into matter. But so therefore karma, which is the accumulation of all the experiences of past lives that to be found in our being, is neither good nor bad. It is the accumulation, I'm repeating myself, but the accumulation of all those experiences. And through the process of purification and by the transformation of our being, we come then into a moment when the karma can be expelled out of our system, because there is a new soul with a new consciousness, and then we are no longer linked to destiny, but we overcome that destiny. And this is something that is a fact on the path that the Golden Rosicrucians proposes. So it's quite revolutionary and it's quite radical, but it's not to be a revolutionary towards the outside world, but to become a revolutionary towards the way in which we have to destroy our old temple and build a new temple in ourselves. And that construction of a new temple will require that even the very base, the very foundations of the old temple have to be dug up, because that's where we find all our karma. And that again comes, we were talking about it right at the beginning, to know oneself, but then also the next step in that process is overcoming oneself, of self-surrender of the I to the essence of man in man.
Okay. Then next, I would ask you who or what is Kundalini?
We've touched on karma, which for those who are involved in esoteric science, who are seekers, may have read books on that. You can find that on the internet, left, right, and center. Kundalini as well. We notice that there are quite a lot of practices today coming certainly from the West. This idea of creating positive thinking, the power of positive thought, the use, as it is also written in some of those books, leaflets and presentations, to develop one's Kundalini. We could say that there is the Kundalini of our pelvic sanctuary, the Kundalini of the ego, the Kundalini of where is housed the whole of our karmic past and also the individuality, the I of every person. And many practices, certain yoga practices also stimulate that Kundalini to try and raise it up and take control of the consciousness of the adept, of that person going that particular spiritual path. In the Golden Rosicrucians and in the tradition of the universal teachings, we speak of the Kundalini of the heart. And this is something that has become more and more apparent in the manifestation of the spiritual path in the last thousands of years in our civilization. So we're talking of the force and energy, and I have to introduce two notions, which is the etheric and the astral energy that comes from the whole region of the heart. And we said that the heart is the very center of the microcosm, the very center of man, where the essence of man is to be found. We talked of the rose of the heart, or the lotus, that seed, the mustard seed that has to grow in the heart. And as that begins to happen, the force of the Kundalini begins to circulate throughout the whole system. It has then an effect not only on the mental, astral, etheric, but also on the very physical attributes of the human being. And the Kundalini of the heart as a powerful vortex of energy will then link itself also to the higher Kundalini coming in through the head sanctuary. We call it also the monad, as the monadic force of fire. So we're then baptized by fire, where that fire will enter into the structure of the person undertaking this path and link itself with the Kundalini of the heart and be able to then descend into the third sanctuary, which is then the pelvic sanctuary that we discussed, where one had the other Kundalini we talked about, which will then purify that third sanctuary and lift up again through the heart into the head. So we then have a circulation of energies and forces which are no longer linked to the ego, to the I person, but is linked then, well, let me say so, but which is linked to eternity, because then that person is no longer thinking, living, existing for himself, for herself, in a closed circle, even in religion, politics, social dimensions, and so on. No, he enters into the field of eternity during this life, not after. Why? Because the Rosicrucian and the Rosicrucian is in a process of service for the world and in the world, because of that suffering, but to understand also the main causes of suffering in the world. And if we understand the spiritual, karmic, which you mentioned, the karmic causes of suffering, then we will have solutions which are true solutions, not solutions just to maintain ourselves as a species on this planet. Again, maybe I've gone a little bit further than your question. You asked about the Kundalini. I've tried to identify the Kundalini of the heart as that powerful vortex of love that can be generated by the person who goes that path of the Golden Rosy Cross today.
Jacek, thank you very much. We'll try to reflect upon all this information that you have given us. We'll try to digest them, and I hope we'll have the chance to be in another session pretty soon. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for giving me that opportunity and for identifying questions which I think are questions that are relevant to seekers, that are relevant to so many in the world today. And through such a video or through our webinars and other means, we try to be as open as we can, using the means that we have to be able to create that true dialogue of heart to heart. Thank you very much for the time.